Welcome to the Ag Inspo Podcast, where we delve into the dynamic world of agriculture, uncovering the stories that inspire, empower, and drive change. Join hosts Rena and Ron Rabo as they explore the journeys of farmers, entrepreneurs, and leaders who are making a difference as they navigate the critical work of transitioning their operation to the next generation. From navigating family dynamics to developing the next generation of ag leaders, we'll bring you the insights and inspiration you need to thrive in today's ever-evolving agricultural landscape. So whether you're a seasoned industry veteran or just starting out, get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered as we learn from best practices and a few colossal failures on the Ag Inspo Podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Ag Inspo. My name is Rena Striegel. I'll be your host today, and Ron is not going to be joining us. So for those of you who just live and die for the moment when we get to put Ron up against trivia, I am sorry to disappoint you, but he will not be here to join us. But as a consolation prize, I am very, very excited to have you meet our guest today. His name is Max Wade, and if you are out on social media and following any ag influencers out there, you have probably run into this man and some of the amazing things that he's been doing. I, of course, got hooked up following him during the California wildfires and was amazed at some of the things he was doing and educating about. And so I'm just so excited, Max, to have you with us today. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in however, because we have so many things to talk about today. I just can't wait to dive into it with you.
You bet. I am so excited to be on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'm just happy to be here.
Why don't you start out by saying what part of the world are you in, and let's just talk a little bit about what you are up to.
You bet. We are in we're in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area. We're right outside of Albuquerque. Our home base is in Rio Rancho, and it's all a big part of the big Albuquerque metropolitan area. And we service. So right now, what we are currently doing is our targeted goat grazing operation, and we service pretty much the whole Albuquerque metro area, and then we branch out a little bit from there, venture across the state a little bit, doing that.
Well, awesome. Tell me a little bit about what is a targeted goat operation for people who might not know.
Right. So targeted goat grazing, you might hear it as goatscaping. This is doing vegetation management with goats and sheep. I don't want to leave my friends the sheep out because we've got a lot of sheep in our program too, and they're a big part of this industry out there. But goats and sheep are amazing at clearing out unwanted vegetation for a lot of reasons. Maybe it's invasive weeds, invasive trees. Maybe it's for fire risk mitigation. Maybe people are just trying to clean up their property. All of those things. You can kind of imagine like we're the agricultural lawnmowers, if you will, so you might want to call a landscaper or a lawn crew to come and take care of your property. Well, instead, we've got goats and sheep, and we go and we do it that way. It's natural. There's, it's environmentally conscious, and it's creative, and it's fun and exciting, and we do a lot of vegetation management doing that.
So how did you get into that? Because that just seems like an incredibly interesting way to utilize goats and sheep.
It's a funny story. I can blame my daughter and my son-in-law for getting us into this. So if we go back a few years, if we go back almost 20 years, my wife and I had a nonprofit, Galloping Goat, or it was Galloping, sorry. Now I'm trying to remember what we had. I'll back up a little bit. So we had a nonprofit where we brought kids out of the city, where they came to us and they could ride horses, get involved in 4-H and start to learn about animals, understand where their food comes from, and just get their hands dirty and having a good time. And so that was called Galloping Grace Youth Ranch. And at the time, we had to find ways to raise funds for the nonprofit. And so we were sitting around with my board of directors at the time, and I said, well, we got to find a way to raise money to feed the animals and to run the program. So it was September, and we had, Halloween was coming up relatively soon. I said, well, I've seen people sell pumpkins before. Maybe we can sell pumpkins. And that was 20 years ago. And we started this little pumpkin patch selling pumpkins on the side of the road. I think we sold a pickup truck load of pumpkins. And then it has gone from that now to a full blown deal that we do every October. Last year, I think we had 42,000 people in attendance, and it's become
My goodness.
massive. I mean, that has been, we closed down the nonprofit several years ago for a lot of different reasons, but we maintain the pumpkin patch. It's become a huge part of the community, and we just kind of kept that. We said, well, we'll just keep this as our family business, and we'll keep on going with it. And then COVID hit, and in 2020, our state shut down. We were not considered an essential business. We were a mass gathering, so both of those did not qualify to be allowed. So the state shut down, so we were shut down. We couldn't have our pumpkin patch, and our pumpkin patch is called Galloping Goat Pumpkin Patch. And because the name implies there's a lot of goats involved, and there were a lot of goats involved at the time. And so we had somewhere in the range of about 85 or so goats. And we couldn't have our pumpkin patch. And so I told the kids, we better start selling off animals, because I don't know how long this thing is going to last and what we're going to do about it. And so they started selling goats. And I think what happened was we got down to the 35 goats that my daughter liked the most. And then she came up with this plan to use them for weed management and to get weeds out of people's backyards. So she and my son-in-law came to me and said, hey, why don't we start or just start renting the goats out for weed removal? And my comment at the time was, well, we're not doing anything else, so let's give it a try. And so that's kind of where it started. And we had 35 goats at the time. We now have 350 goats, and it has increased significantly every year. That's about the same time that I got onto social media. My kids said, you ought to get onto TikTok and start doing showing what the goats are doing. And so we started doing that. And I think we did our first backyard. And 2 weeks later, the local forest manager contacted me. He saw a post that we did on social media, and he said, I think we can use these goats as tools for fire fuels reduction in our local forest. And so at the time, now I've been around cattle and horses and agriculture my whole life, been around goats my whole life, but not at this scale. And he started asking me questions. He said, do goats eat salt cedar? Do they eat elm trees? Do they eat Ravenna grass? Do they eat this? He started just naming stuff off. I said, man, I don't know really, because I've only ever really fed them hay. But I think they will. And so we set up, we'd already knew that they were eating weeds and whatever. And so we set up a 4-day pilot program where he found these different target vegetation in different areas, and we took the goats and we just let them eat. Day 1 we did salt cedar. Day 2 we did elms. Day 3 and 4 I forget what we did, but every day the goats ate them. And so at that point he says, I think you need more goats, because we can sure enough use you. And that's how it got started, where it really kicked off. We went from 35 goats to about 185 goats in the matter of a month. And we have been working with we work with the state forestry department, local municipalities, our local counties, our local conservancy districts, you name it, solar fields. Our goats and our sheep, we graze almost. We have the ability. We're fortunate that we have wonderful weather, and we can graze almost every day of the year. So the goats the herd is on the job just about as much as we possibly can have them out there. If they're at home, they're costing me a lot of money. So the name of the game is to It's to not have them home at all, and that's always the goal.
Well, talk about the herd just a little bit because I would love to understand why sheep and goats. So what's the benefit of putting the combo? Because I know you also have hair sheep, not wool sheep. So maybe you
Yep.
could talk just a little bit about the sheep too.
So we have Barbados black-bellied sheep and some mouflon sheep. They're hair sheep. The reason we have them is because we don't have to shear them, and I don't want to. I don't want to get into the operation of having to shear. The market is not good for wool, and so the hair sheep for me, I'm probably the least versed in sheep, and definitely not in wool sheep. But I know that the hair sheep are similar to goats in a lot of ways. They're hardy. We don't have to worry about shearing them, and they do a lot of the same things that the goats do, but they also offer some diversity for us in the type of jobs that we can get. If you know anything about goats, the goats will eat everything from the ground up, as high as they can climb. They're going to eat, and so we run into a lot of jobs where that's not really the best option to have. So when we have sheep in the herd, that allows us to possibly take on jobs that the goats aren't good for. Orchards, vineyards, things where we've got a lot of vegetation, landscaping that needs to be protected. Now we do that all the time with the goats. We travel with portable fencing all the time, and we protect rose bushes and trees and hedges and whatever it is that needs to be protected. But in some cases, it just doesn't make any sense to have goats on the job, and so we have the versatility of having sheep if we do that. But we also just get a complete. The majority of the work that we do is fire fuels management. So we're in the arid Southwest. Everything that grows here dries up in the wintertime and becomes a major fire hazard. And so having the sheep involved and the goats, we get full clearing basically. So they, the little things that the goats might not get to, the sheep do. The sheep don't get real high, and the goats get everything as high as they can get. So when we're doing fire fuels management, we're trying to clear out everything that's combustible, basically, and thinning things out so that we have distinct fire lines. We have defensible space where firefighters can get in and do things. And so that helps with that.
Yeah. It's been amazing to me as I followed you to watch your befores and afters, especially with tumbleweeds. Like to watch, I watched the reel the other day of the homeowner that had an entire like ravine full of piles of tumbleweeds, and you showed or you demonstrated how quickly a tumbleweed can burn.
Yeah.
And then you turned in the goats, and it was amazing to see there was not even like little sticks that were left. They had completely cleared massive piles. And I think you didn't even have to leave them overnight from that job, I don't believe. They
No, not
ate it
on that.
really quickly.
Yeah, not on that job. We didn't have to. Sometimes we do. Tumbleweed is probably the number one invasive vegetation that we deal with where we are. It doesn't take, we might have on an average 11 to 12 inches of precipitation on an annual basis. So we're pretty arid, and things like tumbleweed, they don't need but a few drops of water, and all of a sudden they're 3 foot tall and 3 foot wide, and they are a major nuisance around here. And so and they dry up in the winter time, and of course that's where they get their names from tumbling around across the western prairie type of deal. And they're highly flammable, and they're flammable. And if the wind is blowing and a tumbleweed is on fire, then you just have a rolling ball of fire that's just creating a wake of more flames as it's traveling. So extremely dangerous around here now. And so our goats spend most of their life eating tumbleweeds, whether they're green tumbleweeds that are 2 or 3 inches tall, or brown dried tumbleweeds that are 3 or 4 feet tall. It's just a plague of these weeds. And so they do a really good job of it. They're not always that excited about it. So we do
I
have
can
to,
imagine not.
we do have to, we supplement quite a bit depending on our jobs. They may have to spend a couple days at home just eating hay, or get a little extra supplement at night because, the dried tumbleweeds, they just don't, they don't have a whole lot in them. So, but our herd is very adapted to it, and they know their job, and they do a good job with it.
Yeah, they go right to it too. So you've also got a couple of furry four-legged guards for these guys. You've got two dogs that work alongside you, and they do two very unique things. So talk about the use of dogs in your work.
The most important one we have is our herding dog, and she's a border collie, and she makes our life so much easier. Now we did this for years without a dog for herding, and you can do it. I mean, it's our goats. We trained them to the bucket, we trained them to bales, trained them to flags, and they do okay with it. Not bad, but we do have to work at it a little bit more. A dog makes a huge difference, and so our border collie, we brought her on a few years ago, and has made life. We can gather 250 goats in less than 3 minutes and have them loaded on trailers and ready to go. And so she's made a massive difference in all of that. So huge part of our operation. And then her name is Q, and so then we have Gus. Gus is our livestock guardian dog, and Gus is a Kangal, Akbash, Anatolian Shepherd cross. Now, we use him on a limited basis because I am very risk adverse in my business, and we deal with, we might be on forest contracts all throughout the year, or government contracts where we really don't have a whole lot of interaction with people, but we're on the job all day because this is called targeted grazing. So we might be going into an area in the forest that we're targeting certain vegetation, just like, say, tumbleweeds, for example. We want to target and eat the tumbleweeds, but we don't necessarily want to eat some of the native vegetation. Our New Mexico olive, or our cottonwood saplings, or some of the native vegetation that the forest managers want to promote and grow. So we have to target around those things, target the bad, and protect the good. And we use that with portable fencing. So we don't do a lot of overnight jobs like in our forest areas, because we have to be moving so much and protecting vegetation. So Gus doesn't necessarily come out with us all that often on our what we call our day jobs. And then he protects everything here at home. And then on certain jobs, we will take him if we're on a long-term forest project where it makes sense for us to put up more permanent, or not permanent, but more structurally sound fencing rather than just electric net. And we might be leaving them for a week or two. Then Gus goes and stays with them. Our biggest predator problems that we have here are coyotes and bobcats, occasional mountain lion type of deal. But Gus doesn't get to go out on the majority of our jobs because so many of those jobs are right in the heart of town. We might be at a city park, a city open space, somebody's backyard. Every person that comes by with a dog, whether that dog is on a leash or is walking beside them, every single dog is going to go towards the goats, whether they're aggressively going towards them or just going to check them out. And Gus sees that as a threat to his goats. So I'm very risk adverse. I do not want Gus, handling a situation with the neighbor's dog. So it's very strategic as when we can use him and when we don't use him.
Sure, sure. I thought it was kind of interesting where you were sort of educating people that when you use goats in your yard, there is a bio product that gets left behind. And I thought it was really interesting that you had to educate people that yes, they do poop, and no, we don't clean it up.
This is a young industry. I mean, it's been around for 20 years or so, or more. But not a lot of people really know about it. And we're working in cities, and not a lot of people in cities are very familiar with agricultural practices or animals or where our food comes from. So the reality that what goes in does come out is not everybody understands that, but we make it really clear. And it's one of my number one questions on social media when people see what we're doing. They're asking, well, what about all of the poop? And we make it really clear with our customers. We go through a long process before we ever actually take a job and get on the job with a customer. They know full well by the time the goats show up that there is going to be a byproduct. There's going to be fertilizer left for them. And, we make reasonable efforts to sweep it off of sidewalks and porches, but we also let folks know, hey, if there's a place that you don't want the goats to be, if there's something you don't want them to climb on, then let us know, because then we're going to have to protect it, because there is no safe place in somebody's yard when it comes to having goats there.
Yeah.
Sheep aren't quite as aggressive about getting onto things and tearing stuff up, but goats, they're mischievous.
So when you send them out on a job, and you've talked about fencing, and I can't imagine like how big some of these areas that you're working in. Talk about just the act of getting set up for a job, and how big are these projects at times?
Right. We take very big projects and turn them into very small increments to handle them. It's that old adage, you bite off, eat an elephant one bite at a time. And because there's a lot of our contracts, we can't keep our goats overnight. It's just part of wherever it is that we're working doesn't allow that type of thing. And we would have to camp out with them, and that in most of those cases, it's not allowed. And like I said, I'm risk adverse. So I have a full-time staff. I have 4 people that are full-time herd managers for us. And I don't ever want to put any one of them in a dangerous situation. And when we're around people, people are a lot more of a concern than animals are when it comes to this business, to me. So there's a pretty heavy homeless population in a lot of places where we're working. Some of the places that we work are not in the best part of town, and so we day job this what I call day jobs, and we go in. We might have a 15 or 20 or 100-acre project, and we may go in and just work on a quarter or a half or 1 acre a day, and it all depends on the type of vegetation, the diversity of the vegetation, what time of year. A green tumbleweed that's 6 inches tall is completely different than a 4-foot tumbleweed that is dry and brittle. And all of those things take a lot longer, different increments of time to deal with. So we go in with our portable electric netting, and we can do just about whatever we want with that. We can set up a pen that's a tenth of an acre, or we can set up a pen that's 5 acres with all of that. And it just kind of depends on the situation. Every job is completely different. Every day is different, and it just depends on the situation. So we'll pull in the projects we really love are those that are extended. We have several forest projects that we work on where we might go there every day for 2 months. And we can leave fencing up. And so every day it's kind of this leapfrog effect. We might set up a 1/4 acre pen. We pull in with our goats and in the trailers. The guys get out, the crew gets out, sets up the fencing, turns the goats out into that particular pen. And then while they're in there eating, they're setting up the next one. And so that way, as soon as the herd is done eating and reducing the vegetation to whatever the targeted or prescribed level is with our land managers, then at that particular time, we just basically open the fence, turn them into the next one, and we just leapfrog it like that until we're done.
Wow. Wow. So you've got, I suppose you have to split up the herd depending on the job. You've probably got residential jobs happening at the same time as your forest jobs. So are you sending different crews and different people all around at any given day?
The funny answer is always, and the consistent answer is always, it depends.
Yeah.
This is such a high variability type of industry. Uh, it can be any number of those things. I try as much as possible to keep my herd together. I have 350 goats, but not always are they all out on the job. We run with two trailers that carry 250 goats between the two of them. And that's our main working herd. The other is our mothers that are either pregnant or they've had babies. Like right now, we just had 80 plus babies. So moms are on maternity leave, hanging out here at the house. And between moms and babies, that's about another 100 goats that are here at the house for a little while. They will eventually go out on jobs as we get closer to weaning time with the babies. So in that case, we might have a herd of moms that are out in somebody's backyard, and then the 200, I might have 25 or 50 goats in somebody's backyard, and we might have the 250 goats out on their day job. I do something that's a little bit, I don't know, I call it my slumber party jobs. So because I'm trying to keep my herd together as much as possible, the more groups that I have out at a time, the higher risk I have of there being a problem. A couple of years ago, I had 3 different herds in 3 different places, and all 3 we had another one of these kind of crazy monsoon storms come in that nobody was really expecting, and it blew in really fast and it created havoc. And I had 3 herds in 3 different places, and they went berserk. And goats do not like rain at all. And so, it just became a kind of a nightmare to handle. So typically what I try to do is we go out and we day job with our goats. And then if I can as my backyard work starts to kick in about this time of the year, late spring and through the summer, the weeds really start growing. And it also starts getting really hot. So we might be out in the forest. We've got we're shaded by the trees in the forest. And then they're able to be cooled. They're cooled off. They eat really well. They're very efficient. But then backyards, we don't always have shade in people's backyards. So we started doing this a few years ago where we started having slumber parties. So as we're leaving our day job in the forest, I might pull into a neighborhood with 150 goats in a trailer and dump 150 goats in somebody's backyard at 6 p.m. And, their backyard might be a quarter of an acre, might be an eighth of an acre, somewhere in that size. And 150 goats they can get a job done very quickly. And so I'll drop them off, or our crew will drop them off in the evening and then come back early in the morning and pick them up and then head back to the day job. Well, they, a couple hours of light in the evening and a couple of hours of light in the morning, they've finished the job in somebody's backyard and they're ready to go back to work when the morning comes around.
And if somebody has kids, they just got a whole night with a bunch of goats. They probably love it.
You just hit on something that, I tell you, social media is a funny place to be, but so many folks question so often. And I post my prices. I try to be very open about that. And, sometimes we're a lot cheaper than a typical landscaping crew might be, or just a crew of people that are going to come clean up. And sometimes we're a lot more. And folks don't always understand why somebody would hire goats to come do this. And, they're going to have manure left over and all of that. Part of it is that they have vegetation that they want gone. But the reality of it is they just want goats in their backyard. And what a great deal to be able to be solving a problem. And if you've got a family, we've had people throw block parties. They've got goats coming over. They invite the whole neighborhood over. We show up. They've got beer and pizza and their music, and the whole neighborhood is ready to see the goats. And we just recently, one that really gets me is a gentleman he hired the goats, and I often tell people, I think you might be able to get this done cheaper by having somebody else do it, or we can come in with a weed whacker and do it. And the folks, they just always say, I just want the goats here. And this particular gentleman was separated from his wife, and they've been divorced, and he had the kids were coming in for the weekend, and he only has them one weekend a month. And he's like, I just think this would be the greatest thing for my kids to be able to come and experience. And for him, yeah, sure, he had a lot of weeds and the goats did a great job. But for him, he's like, he would have paid 3 times as much just to be able to spend that time with his kids, hanging out with the goats in the backyard. And I always tell all my customers, you absolutely can interact with the goats. The only thing that I ask them is don't feed them treats, because they're not going to do their job while they're there, and make sure the gate stays closed. They don't get out of the backyard. And after that, they just have a great time.
Yeah. Tell me just a little bit about just the history of this. It sounds like you mentioned earlier that it was a relatively new thing that has sort of popped up, but just tell me about the industry as it sits today.
There's a lot more of us out there than you might think, but unless you're in it, you don't quite know. So I started a podcast for a couple reasons. I spend a lot of my time talking with folks that are trying to get into the industry, and they want to know, how do I price jobs? What kind of goats should I get? What kind of sheep should I get? What do I do? And I spent a lot of time doing that. And a couple of years ago, I said, I need to create a platform where those folks I don't have to I'm spending the time anyway. So let me get it out there so it's more accessible to people. But also I'm so fascinated. I've been in the industry now for almost 5 years, and I am a total fan, and I really geek out about the whole industry because it's so fascinating. I've been in agriculture my whole life, cattle ranching. Dad always had us on the farm or had us on the ranch. We were always doing stuff, and it's so amazing to me to be able to utilize agriculture and cross that line into a different world and be exposing people to a different world, and be able to kind of bridge a lot of those gaps, and to be able to talk to people and for them to see what the diversity and the importance of agriculture. So I'm so intrigued by the industry, and that's part of why I wanted to start my podcast as well, was so I could interview people that have been in this industry. I've been so fortunate to talk to some of what I believe some of the foundational leaders in this industry, and I'm talking about folks that they're running. I think I've got a big operation. Every day I go out with 250 goats, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of goats. But I'm talking with people that are running 10,000 goats and sheep and doing what I'm doing on a scale that I can't even really comprehend. But some of these folks have been doing this for the last 30 years. I've got an interview, that'll be coming out before long. This lady has been living with her goats for almost 35 years. She's self-titled the Gypsy Goat Grazer because she really hasn't lived in a home in the last 35 years, because she started one day. She said, I need to take goats out and start using them for vegetation management. And she's been on the road with them literally for 35 years. And she runs a couple thousand goats, and they work the entire Western United States, every state. And that's all they do is travel from one place to the other. It's fascinating. It's anywhere from folks that are using 10,000 goats for the last 30 years in this industry. California, when the California fires hit this year, one of my big questions that people ask me is why isn't California doing this? The reality is California has more goats and sheep that are employed as fire fuels reduction and invasive vegetation management than any other place in the entire world. Wow. And there are tens of thousands of animals employed out there. California is a huge state, so you don't, for that many, for herds of 1,000 to be roaming through neighborhoods and homeowners associations and local open space, it's fascinating to think that how could people not know that it's happening? Because you just don't drive down the road and not see 1,000 goats and sheep on the side of the road in the middle of town,
Right.
the middle of San Francisco or the middle of Los Angeles. And it's, as even though there's many of us out there, it's still a tiny industry when we really get down to it. And it's been going on for at least the last 35 to 40 years. And it's starting now. Folks are starting primarily, I think, because of social media. We're able to kind of get the word out there that there is an alternative way of handling vegetation. And I think really when it comes to public land, it doesn't matter, public or private land, but we see so much stuff in the news about fires and how devastating they can be. The use of animals, goats and sheep, and in some cases even cattle, to effectively manage the vegetation it's more really, and it's more useful, more helpful, and more natural to do it than anything we could ever do mechanically or with chemicals. And it's just a great way of doing things. And so people are starting to recognize that, and the ability that these animals have to go places where people can't and where machinery can't. And, a fire doesn't care where it is and where it's going. And we need to be ready for that. And those animals also don't care. They just know that there's food. We're gonna go and we're gonna do it. And it's what they do. I mean, it's what they're born to do. They're born to eat. We weren't necessarily born to go out with chainsaws and work all day and all night like they do. So it's such an effective tool.
What is the sort of life cycle? So you've gone in and grazed an area. How long does it take before you have to go back in and graze that area again? I would imagine with, they're getting right down to ground level. I'm assuming that there are some things that can't survive that, and that may kind of be the end of at least that plant. But I'm sure there's others that are like laughing in your face and say, I'll rise again, and they're back. So what does it typically do for a rotation to where you have to bring the goats back?
It all depends again on the situation. So many of our weeds that we deal with here are annuals. So it's a question that gets asked of me often. Well, if you don't pull the weed up by the root, it's just going to grow back. Well, most of our weeds, we're in an arid environment. Everything that grows here is very resilient. They're drought resilient, but they also have over thousands of years have evolved to be able to survive without much. And so these annuals, the thing about them is we may be able to eat them, in the springtime, in the summertime when they're still green before they've dropped seeds. But if those things, take a tumbleweed, for example, a single tumbleweed that's maybe 3 foot by 3 foot, it might produce 250,000 seeds. And those things, they tumble and they blow and they repropagate themselves. We can have seed banks in the ground if we haven't been effectively trying to manage those weeds. That seed bank can be 5 or 10 years of seeds that are in the ground that just need the right conditions to start to grow. So what we have found is that it really depends on the situation. We can go in on a seasonal basis and knock out a lot of weeds. And if we continue to go back every season, those weeds start to get knocked back, and our native vegetation, if the native vegetation is able to take hold, it begins to choke out those invasives, because our really bad weeds like tumbleweeds, kochia, nightshades, so many of those things are so drought resistant, and they love depleted soils. So much of the work that we do is post-fire work. So we go in after a fire has come through. And we're in a location right now that we've been in for the last 5 years. The fire burned, the vegetation had not been managed. The brush, the understory had not been ever managed. The fire went through there and it burned so hot that it essentially killed the soil. No nutrients, no biodiversity in the soil. And so it was laid barren for many, many years. And then the first thing, the pioneer species to come back are those weeds, and tumbleweeds especially, because they can withstand, they're drought tolerant, and they're nutrient, they can survive on very little nutrients. So in disturbed and depleted soils, they thrive. So what we have found is as we manage those and we start to eat them and reduce their volume, knock them back, open up the soil again, it's counterintuitive to some degrees because we know that we don't want bare soil. But also we don't want a weed like a tumbleweed to cover the soil and shade out the possibility of anything else coming in. So as we go in and manage from year to year, we start to knock back the tumbleweed. We're depositing all of that wonderful fertilizer into the soil. We're moving the soil around, and we're creating pockets for water when it does rain to hold that moisture. And then we start to build the nutrients back into the soil. So in an area like this, where 5 years ago we had nothing but tumbleweeds growing, now we're starting to get that native vegetation growing up all over the place. As soon as we get some nutrients in the soil and that native vegetation coming back, those weeds can't compete anymore. They are getting now choked out by the natural vegetation. And it takes some time for us, it depends. Like there are things that we just can't beat. We can't beat Siberian elms, and we can't beat salt cedar. All we can do and hope to do is to manage them, and we can keep them at bay, and if we can keep things at bay long enough, it gives the opportunities for some of these other things that are a little bit more fragile in our ecosystem to get stronger and to gain a foothold. So we can't beat tumbleweeds and we can't beat kochia, but we can displace them, we can manage them, we can reduce them so that over time, that's the challenge I think that we have in this industry, is it's never a one and done. We cannot go in and take something out today and think that this time next year on this day, it's going to be okay. And it's, agriculture, our entire life is dependent upon rain. Everything is dependent upon rain. And if we get a little bit of it, there's no telling what happens as far as growth. We want that. But our weeds, our invasive vegetation thrives, and the things that are going to choke out our native. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have in this industry when we're talking not on a backyard goatscaping type of project, but on a more fire fuels management and a lot of land restoration. We're doing both with some of our post-fire work. It's native land restoration, and it's also fire management, because we don't want another fire to happen. You saw how quickly tumbleweeds can burn, and they are just a horrible hazard. And so we've got to protect what we've got from lighting up again, and then rehabilitate it. But that can't stop. It's one of those things that, you just have to manage it. So many folks think that we need to leave our natural spaces alone because nature will take care of itself. Nature has done that since the dawn of time, but not when we are involved. We talk about the wildland urban interface all the time. That's where our wildlands and our urban cities, they overlap. And that's why in California, wherever we have these big fires, not only are we losing hundreds of thousands of acres of wildlands, we're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of man-made homes and structures because we overlap. When we overlap like that, it's no longer left to its own devices to be able to take care of itself. We have to input somehow. to protect both our wildlands, our wildlife, and our people, all combined in one.
Right.
And those wildlands left unchecked without the ability, we don't want fire. Fire has always been a way to clean up our wildlands, to regenerate them, and so many of our species thrive on fire. We can't run that risk. We can't allow that to happen. We can't allow fires just to run amok when we live right amongst everything else. So in order for us to have a healthy relationship between the two, the wildlands and the urban areas, it has to be continual maintenance. And I think our land managers are starting to see that to some degree, at least around here, that we now are having contracts that are getting renewed every year. I just got a call. I just got a text this morning from one of my local open space managers. She's super excited because this will be year 2. Her city council has voted that, yes, what the goats and the sheep did last year is fantastic. We need to fund it again this year. And that's where this industry can really thrive and do some really good work is when folks start to understand that we need continual management. It just has to happen. And what a better way than going back to how it was done, how it happened naturally, as our herds of bison and elk and whatever it is came through. They cleaned up everything. They cleaned up all the dry stuff, all of the overstory, and cleared stuff out so that we could get new regrowth and we didn't have a devastating loss. They came in, they moved on, and then came back again. And it just, they fertilized the soil as they went and made for a very healthy place. And I'm very hopeful, but I'm starting to see that trend start to turn a little bit where our land managers are starting to understand that as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. One of the things that I noticed as I followed you is that you not only clean out the clutter for the forest, but you also try to clean out the clutter for the people also. I noticed that you have, diversification even in your own business of trying to help people get rid of clutter. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that you do? Not just eat people's weeds, but you also help them with some other things too.
Well, I think it's maybe it's a blessing or a curse. I'm not sure, but my mind is always racing. It's always coming up with ideas, and I'm seeing opportunities from a business standpoint. And, I think it's like, so many folks that live on the farm, they've got a job in town and, they've got to supplement in some way. Well, I always know that one day I'm not going to have a job for the goats, but I also have employees that I'm responsible for. They've got families. And so as the business owner and business manager, I'm looking for opportunities to diversify so that we might be able to cover some of those gaps. Our main business, probably, it's funny, the most of the time, and what we're talking about is my goat, targeted goat grazing operation. Our number one business is our pumpkin patch. It's a family activity to do and for folks to get involved in the fall. Then we have our goat grazing, but then I'm looking at some of these places that we go to and people and I listen to what people are saying. We'll go in and we might be clearing out weeds in somebody's backyard, but they've got a big pile of trash that they've been accumulating or brush that's there, or they've cut down a tree and we're coming in and we've got big trucks, big trailers, and folks that are used to working outside and doing things. And folks have asked me, well, do you know anybody that gets rid of junk? And I'm like, well, we can do that for you. I mean, we've got the means to do it. So, so many of my jobs on backyards with our goats, we end up doubling up where we're going in, we're cleaning out weeds. And a lot of times people are like, well, I didn't even know that was back there, because it was so overgrown. Can you take that to the dump? Yeah, we can take that to the dump. So it's another extension of our business that fits well. I try to find those things that make sense so that we've got we're already kind of doing a portion of it and we've got the same type of facilities or the same type of equipment. So we do junk removal. I have a pumpkin patch that one year I just decided I'm not going to pay for the rental to put up, because we don't do it at our home place. It's remote. We do it in the middle of town. We turn a 3-acre parking lot into a giant farm and kind of an agro-tourism and so many activities and such. But we've got to put up a security fence all the way around it. And so several years ago, I invested in that. We started doing that ourselves because I got tired of paying for it for myself. Well, now we use that fencing to sometimes fence off big portions for our goats if it makes sense where we're going to keep goats for a long extended period of time. I've got the fencing. I put a crew out there. We throw up, a couple acres of fencing, and the goats can be there with Gus for a couple weeks, and we're good to go. And then we rent that out, and we've got the trucks and trailers. We go drop off goats somewhere. The guys don't have anything to do the rest of the day. Well, we've got a job to go set up some fencing because they've rented. They've got a little event going on this weekend. We're doing a car show pretty soon, where it's a one-day car show, and they've rented our fencing, and so we can go do that. And
Nice.
we've come up with this thing. I didn't come up with it, but out here where we are, we deal with these stickers called goat heads. It's ironic that they're called goat heads and we're in the goat business, but they look like little goat heads. They've got these prongs on there, and they are devastating for your feet, for a dog. You can't, once the puncture vine or the cathrop, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the plant takes over your backyard, you can't use your backyard anymore because the stickers are so bad. And I saw somebody online that had come up with a roller that actually picks those things up. So now we got into that because often we will go into a yard and we'll eat the plant, but they have they have years of seed bed still laying on the ground. We might eat the plant, but as soon as it rains again, they're going to get plants coming back from all of those seeds. So we're able to also go in there and use our rollers, and we can roll up and try to reduce the amount of stickers that are there. So just looking for opportunities to do stuff. We run petting zoos. We got a lot of goats. People love goats, so we'll do petting zoos. We'll do parties. We kind of do whatever we got to do to pay the bills.
I love it. I think diversification is like one of the greatest things that as an entrepreneur, if you can figure out how to get assets working more, then you're really onto something. So you're just making everything work all the time, which I think is an amazing skill to be able to do that.
We're trying.
So I have this, like, in my mind, I'm thinking about all of this stuff that these goats are eating, stickers, dry things. So when you have a baby goat, like, do you have to condition a goat to be able to eat that, or are they just naturally able to just go right out and start eating?
Yeah, a goat's natural tendency, and even sheep as well, but a goat's natural tendency is to eat just about every type of vegetation that they can get their mouths on. Now, the difference of so many folks that tell me about my goats will not touch a weed. Well, if you're fed chocolate cake every day and you're surviving on that and you're healthy and that's great, why in the world would I ever go from eating chocolate cake to eating some dried up tumbleweed? And goats are like anything, like any animal or any person, they can be spoiled, and it's a challenge. I have folks that live right close to me that their goats won't touch a tumbleweed. But the reality is that if that's what they're going to eat, and it's not and I'm not saying we're forcing them to eat anything, but that's their job. In order to run this business and to be effective for people in this business, those animals have to be conditioned to eat things that something else is not going to eat. Goats are remarkable at that, and these hair sheep I'm starting to realize are very similar. They can eat things that even cattle can't eat, and especially horses can't eat, and so it's a conditioning type of thing where they just realize that they are acting as goats have for thousands of years, that they're out there and they're surviving and they're thriving. It's almost every weed or invasive plant besides trees that we eat here have certain levels of toxicity to them. So if you look at any literature that talks about toxic plants, almost every single thing we eat is a toxic plant. The tumbleweeds are toxic. The kochia is toxic. The nightshades are toxic. The Johnson grass is toxic. Everything is toxic. But goats, if you manage them properly, thrive on that type of vegetation. Now, I can't go into a place that is, I can't go into an area that has 10 acres of nothing but silverleaf nightshade. That's one of our very common weeds that we have. If I have nothing, it's about volume and duration versus goat power, basically. I've got to look at the number of animals that I have that are going into a location and the volume of toxicity versus the diversity of the forage. All of those things I have to look at. There are jobs that I won't take because that's all my goats or my sheep will be eating for several days. And over that duration of time, we can cause problems. But they can go in and they can eat a ton of that stuff as long as there's diversity. They're not on it very long. A goat especially can eat things that no other animal wants to or can eat, and they can thrive at doing it. And that's one of those things I think that there's a superpower that goats have. We just, as managers, we've got to unlock that primal ability that goats have always had that they don't even know they've got, to be able to go out there and actually do things that nothing else can do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what is the working life of a goat? How long do your goats, are they on the job?
Yeah. So the first job that my babies get, so I just had, we start kidding at the end of April and we're done by June 1st. And so it's the month of May basically is when we kid. Those goats, those babies, their first official job is at our pumpkin patch. They've been weaned. During the summer, we might have some other small petting zoo type of things that go on. We go to a lot of schools and we might do career days and things for schools, and the babies will go and do that. When we hit pumpkin patch time in October, then that's where they go to work. They all go, they're all part of the petting zoo. People are all over them. They may start out and they want to have nothing to do with a person. And after about 4 or 5 days of getting mugged on by kids and fed sweet feed, they're like, this is the life. We love it. And as soon as they come out of that in October, they join the herd. And so they're whatever they are, around 5-6 months old, and they join the herd full time. And we have goats that are 12, 13, 14 years old, even though we've only been in the business for about 5 years. Some of those goats, they're just out there on the job doing it. And a lot of our babies are just growing up and that's all they know. Once they get out on the job, there's an adjustment period where, they've been at home, they've been pampered, they've come out of pumpkin patch petting zoo season with a lot of sweet feed and a lot of alfalfa and that kind of deal. And then they start eating, they go into wintertime forage, which wintertime forage around here is, cardboard might be a little bit tastier sometimes, but they have a transition period to where they've just got to get things figured out. But goats are herd animals, as so many of our agricultural animals are. And they start looking at what their bigger friends and brothers and sisters are doing and their moms are doing. And they realize, oh, well, I guess that's what I've got to do. And it takes a little while, but they fall into the herd, and they just, after a couple of weeks, and they're just out there doing what they do.
Yeah. Imagine that first day where they go from sweet feed and lots of kids to tumbleweeds and a whole different life. They have to be thinking, what just happened here?
Yeah, it's a shock. I think though that nobody dreads it more than my herd managers, the folks that are out there on the job working every day, because we run with portable electric netting, and we can set that up in so many different configurations, and it's really versatile. And our goats are seasoned to it. They're trained to it. The first few days on the job, the babies are not. So, but they also have this ability, because they're still relatively small, they have the ability to find little holes under the fence that our normal goats aren't going to, they're not even going to, acknowledge that it's there because it's close to this fence that's going to bite them every once in a while. These babies don't have that fear yet. And so for the first couple of weeks, my herd managers are like, man, I do not want these goats out here anymore because they just causing problems. But like, again, after a while, they get everybody finds their place in the herd and realizes the methodology of how we do things.
Yeah. You have to have incredibly special people working with you because, a lot of us have spent a lot of very hot afternoon building fence, and I cannot imagine taking a job and being on a job where every day you're building fence.
They are a special crew, and they're awesome. I mean, we're starting to hit 90-degree weather now, and we're on a job that they are nonstop for 8 hours, nothing but setting up fence and taking down fence, because this is more of a rehabilitation area post-fire, and the vegetation is relatively light, but they're trying to get it cleared out so that the native vegetation can come back. And 250 goats can go through a quarter acre pretty quick when there's not a lot there. So they're running those goats in, and they've set up, yesterday they set up three different pens. Essentially, they run them into the first one, and as soon as they're into that first one, they're setting up pen number 4, because now they're running into, as soon as they're done setting that one up, they're running into the next one. So they'll spend these days, especially in the summertime, they'll spend these days where it's 90 to 100 degrees. And that's all they do all day long, is trying to keep ahead of the goats. And sometimes folks say, well, we should just make a bigger pen so that, it makes sense and you don't have to do it as much. That's why we call it targeted goat grazing. And because there is so much of our vegetation we don't want to eat. We don't want to damage it. We're trying, especially in these projects that have burned down, and now we're finally getting some regrowth of that natural ecosystem. It's fragile, and we don't want to hurt it. And so we've got to maneuver around, and we just can't do you can't put them out there on a 5-acre or 10-acre pasture, essentially, because they're going to mow down everything. And the very first thing they're going to go to, if they got if they've got the choice between a sapling cottonwood, for us in our area, cottonwoods are precious. So if there's a sapling cottonwood growing right next to a stand of tumbleweeds, that little sapling cottonwood is done. That's the first thing that's going to go. So we have to, in order to really maintain that healthy ecosystem and let it regrow, we've got to be on the move all the time and keeping those goats from eating the good stuff and focusing on the bad stuff.
Wow. Well, I think that's amazing. And, you'll have to thank your crew for all of us for all they're doing, because I think that's really important work. And I think, at least for me, it was really exciting to see the use of livestock for those purposes, and rather than some of the other choices that I'm sure those land managers have to make if the goats are not available. So I just think it's wonderful that you do that. And as we wrap up our time together today, we'll make sure, for those of you who are listening, we will get all of Max's socials and his website and his podcast and everything in the show notes for you, because it is incredibly interesting to watch the day-to-day adventures of these goats and to watch how quickly they move in and move out. It's a really seamless. I'm sure it's not seamless. I'm sure you don't show us all the dark underbelly of your business, Max, but for watching it on social, it just seems like everybody knows their job. Everybody knows where they need to be. And you're making very easy work of, I'm sure, not always incredibly easy jobs.
Well, our people always know where to go and where to be. We are dealing with animals, and a lot of them, and you just never know from one day to the next. There are so many variables, that the guy with a lawnmower doesn't have to deal with. And, fencing and dogs and people and weather, the rain, the heat, the shade, the type of vegetation. the back, the behind the scenes is this massive coordination effort on a very micro level, that every hour is even different than the next hour, and those animals, they act differently every hour depending on what's going on,
Right.
and so it's which also makes it such a fascinating business, because it changes in an instant, and we just have to be ready for that. And I'm just grateful that I have such an incredible crew, because they're out there doing it every day. Occasionally I'm out on the job, not as much anymore because we've gotten so much bigger, and we're doing so much more. The coordination of it all is monumental, and so I get to sometimes be in my own world of stress, but maybe I'm in air conditioning and shade while my
Yeah.
crew is out there. They're banging away at it, and they're fighting the elements, and they're doing an amazing job. Whether it's 5 degrees out and windy, or 105 degrees, they're the ones that are making it happen.
Yeah. So your daughter helped with the idea to start this business. Is your daughter still working with you today?
So she was on the original crew. It was her and her husband. They were the original crew. My son-in-law is still out there. He's my lead herd manager. But my daughter I've got a couple amazing grandsons now, and that's what she's doing. But she does help me with my social media quite a bit. So
Excellent.
most of the posts that you see are mine, that I do completely myself. But she adds in quite a bit of additional videos and things there to help out. So she's still definitely deeply involved. I don't have a clue what one goat is from the next. And so she's a goat savant. So I can say, well, who in the world, what goat is that? And she can tell me, well, this is the buck that had and this is the doe. And she doesn't even have to keep a spreadsheet. It's all in her head. She knows who belongs to who and when it was born. And they're a bunch of goats. Sometimes I look out there and I just see a herd of goats, but if I've got a question, she's the one to go to.
That's amazing. So she's your genetics supervisor, making sure that all is well.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. Well, Max, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day. And it's just exciting to get to talk to you. I know if we talk again in a year, I'm sure we'll have all kinds of updates for us. So I hope you'll come back and just let us know how you're doing and what new things have evolved in your business. And, we just keep wishing you well. And thank you again for all you're doing, because it really, truly is an amazing use of those animals. And it's exciting to hear about it. So for all of you who are listening, please check out the show notes, follow Max. I am sure that you will get as much joy out of it as I have, since I found him last year. And, again, we'll look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of Ag Inspo.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Ag Inspo Podcast with Ron Rabo and Rena Striegel. Find Ag Inspo on Transition Point Business Advisors or Farm Journal's YouTube channels, as well as anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. For more information about today's guest or the resources referenced today, please see the show notes listed below. Join us next time when we will meet another inspirational leader who has taken those small steps to bring about really big change.